What's going on, guys? Andrew of Newmark Gaming back here today to talk about some more Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains. This time it's going to be episode 73, the continuation of our duel we started last time between Yusaku and Bowman. Now, despite the fact that we have seen these two square off on several occasions before, I do think they've done an overall good job keeping this interesting, particularly as a result of Bowman. Playmaker, I've already expressed, I'm not necessarily the fondest of as a protagonist a lot of times, but Bowman, I think, with each of these duels we've watched, develop some. It's almost like kind of the reverse of what a lot of times you see in a lot of stories, where every time the main protagonist faces an enemy, they might lose the first time and then grow continuously stronger, come back, and come to overcome their enemy. In this case, what we're really witnessing is Bowman getting stronger each time he duels Playmaker, which is kind of a nice way to turn the table. I think it's a fresh take on that whole little bit of a story arc we've seen carried out so many times. Adding on top of that, I think Bowman has shown a lot of development to his character. Initially, was barely able to control himself. A lot of times he would end up grasping his head and kind of flinching and cringing and unable to keep control of his actions in the middle of a duel for brief periods of time. And he wasn't dueling as intelligently or as quickly. He didn't seem quite as confident in himself as he came to be in this duel, where he is basically in the driver's seat up until Yusaku pulls some shenanigans that we'll get to in a little bit here. So to watch his evolution as an antagonist is something I very much enjoyed, because I don't feel we get that in Yu-Gi-Oh! Especially a lot of times from an antagonist is development. Usually they're the ones who are in the power player spot, and it's the protag that's developing. Here, we've got the tables turned, which has kept things interesting. I also think the route that they've decided to go with him developing is another nice twist, because rather than being... I mean, he's definitely evil. Essentially his goal is to have AIs wipe out humanity and take things over, right? But his perspective and way of going about that is rather intriguing to me. It's almost like he's so arrogant, he's not immediately concerned with victory. He wants to use Yusaku as a pawn to continue to evolve. When he had his Hydrodrive Monarch monster out, there was a chance when Yusaku brings out these two Signet tokens right before he makes his play that forces Bowman to create a no result for the duel, that he could have done the dice roll effect, and if it would have worked for him again, he would have stopped Yusaku's turn right there. He didn't do it, though. He stops and says to himself, I have to see what this new trick that these two have up their sleeves is. I want to see how this plays out. He's so powerfully in control of the situation, he's not worried excessively about losing, because he has that backup card we later find out in Graveyard Effect that he can trigger to create a no result. But on top of that, he's a lot more concerned with the idea of continuing to grow in strength. And because they're putting so much focus on the fact that Bowman, he's obsessed with this idea of evolution, part of me genuinely believes they may end up going a route sort of like what they did with Aporia in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds during the Arc Cradle storyline, where he's initially this antagonist, then he sort of comes to see the side of the other, our protags, and fights alongside them. Now, I don't think they'll necessarily warp him back against the protagonist again the way they end up doing with Aporia. That was kind of a weird way of watching things play out, but still a big fan of the Arc Cradle arc, so not a knock to that. But my big point here is, if Bowman's so obsessed with evolution and he wants to learn so much from Playmaker, I don't think it's entirely outlandish for him to come to the conclusion eventually that, wait a second, humanity's been the ones that have been evolving all this year. Lightning posed this idea that I'll create an AI that can evolve faster than any of them. But maybe Bowman comes to discover that the sort of artificial evolution that he's been going through isn't as effective as necessarily the kind of overtime gradual process that humanity's faced. And maybe because he is, once more, an AI programmed with the idea of logic and reasoning, if he sees a better system in humanity, once more, I don't think it's entirely outlandish for him to end up switching sides. Now, proceeding back to his whole obsession with the evolutionary thing, he even admits to although he is very critical of him for being instinctual and such, he points out that I's obsession with seeking fun and seeking adventure is critical to the ability of the AIs to evolve, because he develops a big, strong sense of individualism, and without that, you don't have the individual characteristics that often end up clashing with each other to force evolution and learning, which is what essentially was created amongst the Ignises themselves. Bowman pointing out that that was a key feature in their development, and eventually the development of him, which is, at least in Lightning's eyes and his own, basically the equivalent of a quote-unquote Ignis 2.0. So with all that being said, Bowman's got this big overarching idea of evolution, and I think that that adds a lot to his character, because his purposes are a little bit more ambiguous than they are downright diabolical, because it seems like he's just seeking the most advanced form of life that he possibly can to be found. Now, moving a little bit past the fact that I think Bowman helped keep the duel interesting, we did, of course, get some growth with Yusaku and Ai here. A little bit of trust really beginning to develop between these two. I think they're really starting to show that Yusaku, even though he's not a very heartfelt, hard-on-sleeve kind of, hey, you're my friend and I'm going to be outright with you about it type of guy, he definitely trusts Ai. I mean, Ai essentially almost cost them the duel in the last episode by encouraging Playmaker to play his last set of cards in his hand, basically show the last trick in his sleeve in an all-out attack to try and finish off Bowman in one turn so they didn't have to fear him anymore. But that obviously went very wrong, left Playmaker with extremely low life points in a position where he was digging himself out of a corner. You could on Ai. Playmaker doesn't. His point is, hey, you know, that I made that decision, but coming from someone who's a little bit of an edgelord like Playmaker, basically what he's saying is, we made that decision together. It's as much my fault as it is yours. Relax. We got into this together, we'll get back out together. And funny enough, that's really what ended up happening, and I think this is a good callback to a lot of the themes that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is rooted in, which are friendship, co-reliance on people, those types of things. So even an extremely strong, independent, hey, I need to handle things on my own type of soul like Playmaker can still show that, hey, I'm willing to lean on people. I acknowledge the fact that I am stronger with somebody at my side than I am individually on my own. And I think having these moments is really key for a character like Playmaker, for Yu-Gi-Oh! To stay to its core themes, given the fact that he's the most strictly independent protagonist we've had so far by a long shot. And for the past two series of Yu-Gi-Oh! We've had ones that are very outright about their dependence on their friends, their loyalty to their friends and everything else. Playmaker is like you say, if you would have just dragged him way further into the lone wolf type of mentality. So the fact that he ends up relying on Ai, the fact that he's able to tell Ai, it's okay that you messed up, it's fine, we messed up, not just you. And the fact that they end up digging out of it together by essentially replicating Yuma's Shining Draw, which, I mean, I guess it is a card game anime, so what are you going to do with it? You're backed into a corner, what do? You rig your odds so you draw the exact card you need. But the way they went about it was at least somewhat intriguing. We did, of course, get to see Yusaku Synchro Summon, so that was pretty awesome. Cyber's Quantum Dragon, I like the design of it overall. It does have a little bit of that, multi-eye mouth type of, almost like Slifer the Sky Dragon-esque face to it. Once more, like the design overall, but not my favorite of the dragons. I honestly feel like Konami really hit the nail on the head with Arc 5 and a lot of their dragons. They were probably my favorite of the dragons we'd seen in a long time. So I guess this is a little bit of a step down for that for me, but to each their own. I mean, Arc 5 I'm very biased towards in terms of their dragons, because Dark Requiem Dragon, favorite dragon in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Other than Black Rose. So moving forward a little bit from that, I do think it was awesome to see that synchro summoning thing, and I think it's showing an overall arching theme about this story arc that we're getting from Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains, in that there is a lot of focus on evolution as a whole. Not only is Bowman obsessed with it, we're seeing them constantly personify that sense of evolution within our protagonists. You have characters like Yusaku and Revolver and Aoi, showing different forms of summoning that weren't even hinted at necessarily existing in Season 1, which you could probably claim as a plot hole, considering it's hey, we never even mentioned fusion summoning before, but here's fusion summoning, and those types of things. But the point still holds that they seem to have this idea of evolution and personal growth, even though I think they might be a little too outright about it at times. I do think a lot of the subtleties handled pretty well, and I like it a lot on the whole, considering Yusaku, I felt, was a pretty stagnant protagonist throughout most of Season 1, so even though I still want to see the guy lose, and he hasn't yet, he did manage to at least develop his skills more here than I think he did throughout Season 1, and I think all the characters are showing a lot more growth than they did in Season 1. I think Season 1 was like a dragged-out prologue, and then they were sort of like, oh, wait a second, we were supposed to have an overarching story arc here and not just introduce a bunch of characters sometimes. But if you want more thoughts on my thing with Season 1, see my Season 1 Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains thoughts video. So, just to wrap this episode up a little bit, or episode review up a little bit, I should say, let's just get back to the fact that we did have a no result. And despite the fact that, once more, I do want to see Yusaku lose, I think a no result is a step in the right direction, because it acknowledges that Yusaku's very strong, but he can be thrown off guard. I mean, Revolver freaking extra linked him. and he basically didn't even break a sweat in Season 1. He just kept going, plowed through, and came out completely destroying Revolver on the whole in that duel once more. He completely destroyed Revolver, who was this greatly built-up antagonist, the first couple times they dueled as well. And even against Bowman, he wins the first two with a pretty clear victory. Here, he barely manages to put pressure on Bowman, and even when he does, he can't even finish the job. Bowman still had another weapon in his graveyard, and Bowman delayed the fact of activating his dice roll skill that could have shut down all of Yusaku's plays and set him up for victory anyway, because Bowman wanted to see how Yusaku and I reacted to a certain situation. So with all that being said here, you could count this as a pseudo loss for Yusaku, because all things being weighed, he never really regained control of the duel, which I think, coming from these writers and as far as we are into the show, I don't think we're necessarily going to see a loss to for Yusaku. Normally, if our main pro tag is going to lose, it kind of happens episode 60 or earlier, and we're at episode 73 now. So I'll take this. I think this was a good moment for Yusaku. He even admits at the end he was not expecting Bowman to have come this far as a duelist or as a person. So I think this is really beginning to hit the nail home that Yusaku does have some weaknesses to him, and he does need to lean on other people sometimes. I mean, if we wouldn't have had I be like, hey, I've got this extra special program I've been storing away for you that I just kind of didn't mention that you had, we wouldn't have seen Yusaku even manage to pull out the no result. So I like the fact that they're humanizing him a lot. I think this is the first episode within a duel where we've really had to see Yusaku kind of flinch, sweat a little bit, and dig himself out of a pretty deep hole in terms of the fight in a situation where he didn't feel like he was in control. So on the whole, guys, I really enjoyed this episode. Be sure to let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment section down below. Sorry I got a little bit behind on these reviews for a bit, but I will be doing my best to catch up, and I'll catch you guys next time with some more Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains reviews.